ESPN MLB insider Buster Olney joins us to talk all things Dodger baseball. That's coming up next on Dodgers Dugout Live.
It's time for Dodger baseball. Welcome to Dodger Stadium.
This is the golden age of Dodger baseball. The Dodgers are building a dynasty.
You got it, Warrior Parade! We got it, Parade! The Dodgers punch back and head to the championship series! Tony starts the 50-50 clock! Roki Magic! Freeman hits the ball, right field! She is gone! You start the party, Los Angeles! Your Dodgers have won the World Series!
Think blue, bleed blue, and I'm out.
What's going on, Dodgers Nation, and welcome to another episode of Dodgers Dugout Live, the #1 Dodgers show and podcast on YouTube. My name is Doug McCain, credential member of Dodgers Media. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And we've got a special guest today, so we're going to get right into it. We have ESPN MLB insider Buster Olney. If they sold posters of this guy, I would probably have one on in my room growing up. Looked up this guy for so many years. Awesome to have him back on the show. Buster, thank you so much for joining us here on Dodgers Dugout Live.
Absolutely, Doug. Great to talk with you.
Awesome. And the first thing I want to ask you, Buster, we talked a little bit about it before the show. Now you're kind of in, okay, are the Dodgers kind of what the Yankees were in the late 90s, in the 2000s? I mean, a lot's going to be made about that team being the last team to repeat. We haven't had a repeat champion in Major League Baseball since 2000. But the first thing I want to ask you, though, is considering the Dodgers are a reigning champion, is this the most aggressive you've ever seen a team be, just the offseason following a World Series title?
Certainly, since I've been covering baseball, without a doubt. I mean, it has just felt like every day brings news of another big signing by the Dodgers, and it just goes and goes and goes. What's $1.7 billion committed over the course of this offseason to a team that won the World Series? It's pretty remarkable. It's getting a lot of conversations in baseball. As you know, there are people around the sport who will, on one hand, say, hey, it's not only about the Dodgers and their money, but it's about building a great culture. They clearly have a fun team. I think there are players who now gravitate toward the Dodgers as a place where they want to be, and that can change from year to year in baseball. I think in recent years, people have loved, for example, the Atlanta Braves clubhouse, and players at times have talked about the Phillies clubhouse. Well, right now, the place where a lot of great players want to be is with the Dodgers. So all those factors are going in to, put them in this great position. But there's also no question that there's a lot of unhappiness with other teams. The phrase gluttony was used to me by a rival executive over the last week, especially as the Dodgers went from getting Sasaki to getting Tanner Scott, to loading up on their bullpen the way that they have Kirby Yates.
But Buster, if you're the league, last postseason, you had Dodgers, Yankees. It was the most viewed World Series since 2017. You have the face of your sport, the biggest superstar playing in a major market like Los Angeles. There's no way that Rob Manfred in the league has any issue with this, right?
Well, I think that they probably are concerned about the disparity. And if Rob Manfred isn't necessarily concerned, I think small market owners will be concerned. Now, I will tell you, it was more than a decade ago that Billy Beane, who runs the Oakland Athletics, and this is when the Yankees were sort of the dominant franchise in the sport, he told me about how sometimes fans would complain to him about, the Yankees have an unfair advantage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he defended the Yankees more than anybody. He said, look, it's great for the sport to have a team like the Yankees, the dominant franchise that everybody wants to see. And on the other hand, and I think this is where, rival owners are going to come into the conversation, to see the Dodgers with a payroll 6.5 times greater than the Marlins or 3 times plus greater than the Orioles, that's a disparity that other owners are going to complain about. And the last time we had a major labor stoppage in 94, 95, players went on strike, but the real internal fight was not about players versus owners. It was small market versus big markets. The owners basically, insisting that the players solve their problems at that time. And I think that's what the concern is among other teams, is that as the Dodgers sort of separate themselves financially, it's going to spur this internal war between owners.
But doesn't it kind of get lost in all this, the fact that, I mean, look, the Dodgers, they're the team that has the healthiest TV contract, $8.25 billion. You have an ownership group that wants to make this the golden age of Dodger baseball. I mean, at some point, you just have to accept the fact that the great players around the league are going to want to join the organization.
Yep.
That it's not just about what they give you from a contract standpoint. You're in Los Angeles, you're competing for championships, you have the baseball development department, you have the analytics department. It just feels like, to me, it is an organization that has everything buttoned up and they're fully realizing that potential. Let's not forget, Buster, we lived through the McCourt era, and it was very, very different. Right. We lived through a guy that was struggling to write checks for his players when it came to payday. So we're enjoying this.
As you should. And look, I think those late 90s Yankees teams are a great comp to what's going on. You know, not only the Yankees have a lot of money, that was a given, but they developed Derek Jeter and Andy Pettitte and Mariano Rivera. And on top of that, you had players, star players, wanting to come to them. When Roger Clemens was traded by the Toronto Blue Jays, he basically, through his no-trade clause, forced his way to the Yankees. Chuck Knobloch did the same thing. That's kind of where the Dodgers are, right? If you are a successful veteran and you want a chance to win a World Series, what team gives you a better chance in this moment than the Dodgers? So, I mean, we have focused a lot on Sasaki during the course of this offseason, but you think about a guy like Michael Conforto, comes over from the Giants on a one-year contract. He's had some ups and downs. He's had some injuries. My goodness, he's going to have so much fun this year being on this team. He's not going to have the same sort of role that he had when he was with the Mets, when he was always a full-time player, and there's no question he was going to be in the lineup. But he's going to the Dodgers because he wants to win a championship in part. And I think that's how the team is viewed by a lot of players right now.
Yeah, and Buster, one thing that I've been kind of saying is, last time I checked, isn't Boston a major market? Why didn't they pay Mookie Betts? Right. Isn't Atlanta a major market? Why didn't they pay Freddie Freeman? The Angels, they didn't even want to match what Shohei Ohtani was getting for the Dodgers. I mean, is there kind of a misconception out there in your mind as far as how they're utilizing the deferrals and just how they're going about their business, and knowing that other teams can do the exact same thing if they wanted to?
Especially when you're talking about deferrals that don't have interest.
Yeah.
This is not, it's almost a no-brainer in business. When I covered the Baltimore Orioles, Peter Angelos, the Orioles owner, loved to defer salary that was without interest because he knew he could use the money. That's exactly what the Dodgers are doing. Every other team has the opportunity to do that. They should do it. And I think Peter Seidler, the late great owner of the San Diego Padres, demonstrated to a lot of other owners, look, it's not only about what your cash flow is, but you can use the equity of the franchise. The idea that, the Padres now went from being, generally speaking, a small market team to being a place that's probably one of the most popular games to attend. That's because Peter Seidler decided he wanted to build something great. You talk to folks with other teams, they think the Padres were nuts with how they spent money. They think they're going to have a problem financially going forward. I asked Peter about all that a couple of years ago, and I, behind home plate in San Diego, and he looked at me and he said, we'll be fine, because he knows that the equity of the team is way up. So to hear some of these owners, I know Tom Ricketts bought the Cubs for $865 million, and now it's worth God knows how much money, $3 billion, $4 billion. You're telling me that signing a $150 million player this winter would have potentially threatened his wherewithal? I don't think so. I agree with you. The premise of your question that other owners can do more.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things too, where you got the proximity, LA to Japan. We know that is favorable for Japanese players. Kind of got to go all the way back and thank Walter O'Malley for moving this team to Los Angeles. And the organization, you got Sandy Koufax behind you, players that have made this an iconic franchise. But in your mind, I know it's a very nuanced conversation. It could be a 2-hour-long podcast about having a salary cap or a salary floor. But do you think there will be any change in the next 3 to 5 years when the next CBA comes around too that could negatively impact the Dodgers and how they're going about constructing their roster?
Not without a major war. Like, I think to get to that point, it would have to be a shutdown of the sport. We know that in the last labor negotiation, I'll try to keep it streamlined. In the last labor negotiation, the owners presented an idea for a salary cap, salary floor to the players, and it was dismissed within 15 minutes. To this point, the Player Association, has their stated principle is that they just don't believe in a salary cap. Now, I do think, and there are a lot of agents, there are a lot of folks in baseball who believe that the idea should be examined, because if it means more money for more players on the union side, why wouldn't you at least take a look at it, right? And so I'm curious to see if that happens the next time around, because privately some players are wondering, look, if there's a bigger pie for us all to share in, maybe it's an idea that we could look into. But at the moment, I think the owner or the players are absolutely dead set against this idea. And to get to that point for small market teams to force the sport to move in that direction, they would have to shut down the sport for some time.
Yeah, it feels like that would have to be the way they would go about to get real significant change. Now, want to get your thoughts a little bit on Roki Sasaki. Of course, that was the talk of baseball for where's the offseason. And what I've been kind of telling the viewers of this show is you're pretty much getting a guy could be a 200, potentially $300 million player for less than $10 million. And one thing I've been saying is, hey, what if Paul Skeens could have just chosen any team he wanted to play for? Do you think that there should be some level of international draft or anything like that? I mean, we have things in place now, but what are your thoughts on just the Dodgers landing Roki Sasaki and how that transpired?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, he's considered already to be one of the best pitching talents in the world. And the idea that you get the player at age 23 with 6 years of control going forward, and not have to sign a 30-year-old free agent, to upgrade your rotation. What an absolute win for the Dodgers. I will tell you flat out, folks with other teams absolutely believe the fix is in on this thing. They thought there was an agreement behind the scenes, that the Dodgers had this thing going all along. They were mad with how it played out. They were asked, the teams, going through this process, were asked to give information to Sasaki on what they would suggest to improve his fastball. They handed that information over. Now it's proprietary information that's in the hand of the pitcher and the Dodgers. So a lot of it made teams mad, but the bottom line is the Dodgers get a great pitcher, and someone and I think the Dodgers right now are the perfect team to have him, because they will slow play him, as you know. Like, they are not going to push him. There would be some organizations that would get a player like that and say, you know what, we want you to throw 200 innings. We want you to throw 220. We're going to have you run until you fall apart. The Dodgers, if he threw 140 innings this year, it would shock me. Like, I could see with the depth in their rotation, they can protect him a little bit, and they will protect him a little bit. And in some respects, I think that means it's a great place for him to go. Now, the question of an international draft or other teams having access to that's going to be one of the arguments I think we have before the next labor agreement, where small market teams say this isn't right. That the Dodgers basically, have a beachhead in Japan for the best players there. They have an advantage over the rest of us that we can't overcome.
Yeah, and as Joel Wolf was saying the other day, I mean, he felt like when they left San Diego, he could have signed with the Padres. When they left Toronto, he could have signed with the Blue Jays. But just all things you point out, I mean, 6-man rotation, the ability to not force him into being your number one guy. I think all those things make so much sense for Roki. So I'm like, hey, how can you blame the guy? Also, as your colleague Jeff Passan pointed out, I mean, Shohei brought Decoy to the dinner in Bel Air. How do you say no to that? Okay. I mean, I'm not saying Decoy is a better GM than AJ Preller or anything like that, but I think that is something that definitely appealed to him. Now, when you look at the rest of this Dodgers roster, I mean, on paper, they have a chance to really potentially go for the all-time wins record. We know that the Cubs, 1906, the Mariners, 2001, tied for 116 wins. A team that you were very closely covering in the late 90s, the Yankees, they won 114 games in the regular season, also 125 games total when you combine the regular season and the postseason. Question I want to ask is, if you're the Dodgers, do you get enticed to try to go for that all-time record, knowing that you won the World Series with 98 wins last year? I mean, how do you think that comes into play? And do you think this team has the potential to be an all-time team?
So I think that is going to develop organically, the idea of becoming the all-time wins leader in a year. Beat the Yankees record in 98 of 125. But I could easily see, I mean, Dave Roberts, the Dodgers manager, as you know, grew up a Lakers fan. And one of the famous moments in Lakers history was because in the NBA, there was a parallel situation. Teams hadn't gone back to back. And that at a championship rally, Pat Riley laid down the gauntlet for the Lakers and basically turned back to back, right? And he was pushing that team to try to do that. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what Dave Roberts does this year. If he makes that the focal point, let's become the first team that goes back to back. Now, we'll tell you, having covered that 98 Yankees team, that, that team was incredibly motivated after getting knocked out in the playoffs in the first round the year before. And they brought an intensity to the ballpark day after day after day, which is really hard in a way that I had not seen. And I don't think we've seen hardly ever. They finally kind of ran out of gas a little bit at the beginning of September. And that's going to be the challenge for the Dodgers, as the season goes along, is keeping up that day-to-day intensity. That with a lot of great players, they're going to win a lot of great games. But if they start out the season, 80 and 35 or 80 and 30, all of a sudden that carrot's going to be in front of them. And the players will organically begin to think about driving for a record in the way that the 98 Yankees did, in the way that the 2001 Mariners did, just a few years after the Yankees won 114, the Mariners won 116. That becomes something that pushes the players, especially through that lagging times of the regular season. So it can be a plus. But I will say, knowing that the Dodgers' focus is going to be on winning back-to-back in the World Series, I think that they probably will fall short because they'll make personnel decisions to protect their chances in October. They're not going to drive these guys, to play every day all through September to put themselves in a position to break a National League win record, for example.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. If you get off to an extremely hot start, you're almost going to be pressured into going for it, just like the Patriots.
Internally,
yeah, exactly.
That's the best thing,
for
right?
sure. Yeah,
the players, the conversation among them, where they start to push each other a little bit. That's how those things develop. Not Dave Roberts or there's somebody in the front office saying, "Hey, we got to get this record."
No, totally, 100%. I think if you're a Dodgers fan, you think to yourself, well, what happened in 2022 when we set a franchise record, 111 wins, and then you lose to that Padres team in the first round? So you kind of balance that out. But hey, winning's fun. I mean, it's fun to drive around your team's winning and you're having that success. Now, as far as what the Dodgers might continue to finish up this roster, kind of want to ask you about a player like a Kik Hernandez. I mean, you got guys like Shohei and Freddie and Mookie, all these future Hall of Famers, all-stars. I mean, for teams that you covered, how important is someone like a Kik Hernandez to bring back and just really put the finishing touches on a roster like this?
Incredibly important. Again, my experience of covering an all-time great team was that 98 Yankee team. And I think guys like Luis Sojo and Tim Raines and Darryl Strawberry, who at that time, he wasn't the MVP Darryl Strawberry, he was a part-time player. They were really important. What separated that team was its depth, and that's what the Dodgers potentially have. That I think that's where their bullpen moves have come in. They've got good relievers. Ryan Brazier's a good reliever, but it does seem like that they feel like, look, if we can go from having a grade B reliever to having an A- reliever, we're taking that, right, every time. And again, the season is so long. I think that if you're a fan and you look at the players and you tune in one game and you imagine them having the same intensity that you did when you played Little League, it's not that way. This is their daily job, and they go through ups and downs like the rest of us do, where some days you're really into it and some days you're not really into it. And so to have personalities that bring energy to the park, positive energy to the park, like Kike, that's incredibly important. Now, I haven't broken down the Dodgers roster and who would Kike replace per se. Who else do they want to get playing time for? Guys in the minor leagues. What are they going to do with Outman this year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you absolutely have to pick the right personalities for those spots at the end of your roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And those guys you bring up, Raines and Soho, and those guys are so important. I've been calling Kike, you brought up the Lakers earlier. He's like the Dodgers version of Derek Fisher, where he might not be in the Hall of Fame, but he's so important to their success as a role player. Now, last time we spoke, Buster, it was before the postseason began. And I asked you about Dave Roberts and all the pressure that comes along with this job because of the early exits in the last couple of seasons and the way the roster is set. Well, he went from maybe a guy who maybe if they got swept, maybe he's on the hot seat or there's going to be at least loud questions about him. Now, do you think it's a part where he's just headed for the Hall of Fame and he basically has his job for as long as he wants it?
I don't know about having the job for as long as you want. I mean, when you're in a job like that, you just never know. Joe Torre was the manager of those teams. in the late 90s, and by 2007 the relationship kind of was you could feel it starting to splinter a little bit. I don't know what's going to happen with Dave going into the future, but I agree with your premise that he has built a foundation for a Hall of Fame career as a manager, right? He wins the World Series this year, and they become the first team to go back-to-back since the 98 2000 Yankees. I think it checks the box. I think he's in that kind of position. And certainly with his contract situation, he's in a great position of leverage now. You know, we saw Craig Counsell, what was it, 15 months ago, play out his free agency, wind up signing a record deal with the Chicago Cubs. You know, Dave now has demonstrated he can lead a great team of great players, and be a plus on that. And to hear all the personal endorsements from guys like Max Muncy after the World Series really spoke to that. So he's got a lot of leverage going into this year with his contract situation.
Yeah, it's just wild how just a World Series changes things so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember just reading Dodgers books years ago thinking, wait a minute, the fans hated Tommy Lasorda at one point. I thought he was just beloved the entire time he was a Dodgers skipper, but turns out during the course, there's some rough times, and I think Dave is at that perfect spot. But we got Buster Olney joining us here on Dodgers Dugout Live, the #1 Dodgers podcast and show on YouTube. Lots of comments, lots of people showing you a lot of love, and they want me to ask you about Nolan Arenado. Now, Nolan Arenado is one of the best defensive third basemen, if not the best defensive third baseman of all time. He has made no mistake about the fact that he has an affinity for the Dodgers, grew up loving the Dodgers. Do you think that there's any world where they would go that direction and potentially swing at a deal for Arenado?
A stat to back up your point about him being a great defensive player. Earlier this week when Ichiro was voted in the Hall of Fame, in his first 10 years in the major leagues, he won a Gold Glove in every season. And I think he's tied with 3 other players for that. And one of those is Nolan Arenado, who won a Gold Glove, in every year. Look, he has been on a platter for teams to make a trade for months. And I asked about the Dodgers about 6 weeks ago, and I have to protect the source, I have to sort of phrase it this way. I was told if the Dodgers wanted him, they would have gotten him, right? It's not like it's been a secret that he's been available. And to this point, it doesn't look like that they're necessarily that he's at the top of their list in terms of an interesting player. One of the questions would be, I think, and I'll use what happened with Ichiro as an example. When he got traded from the Mariners to the Yankees, Brian Cashman told me this the other day. He sat on the side of the road, he pulled off the road when he was driving from East Florida to West Florida, and basically ran through all the scenarios with Ichiro. Look, are you going to have a problem if we pinch hit for you? Are you going to have a problem if we bench you? Are you going to have a problem not starting? Because, in Seattle, perception of Ichiro was that he was somewhat difficult for the manager. So Brian Cashman ran through that. A similar conversation would have to take place with Nolan Arenado, given the Dodgers culture. That Chase Utley came in and helped establish this, where players were okay being part-time players. Would Nolan be okay with that? I don't know, but I think that would probably be his Dodger experience if he were to be traded to LA.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And just look, Max Muncy's kind of one of those guys that on other teams, he's your all-star slugger in the middle of your lineup. In the Dodgers, he is almost an afterthought sometimes, and they still like him, and he's still very productive. One of my favorite Ichiro stats, too, you brought up the Gold Glove thing. He led the league in singles 10 years in a row, and there's only been 2 times we've had one guy hit over 200 singles in a season. It was him, man. I mean, this guy was incredible. I saw a picture of him meeting Peter O'Malley in 1995 wearing a Dodgers jacket. I'm like, man, what could have been, right? It'd have been pretty awesome. So, yeah, good stuff. And then Jack Flaherty, real quick, I want to ask about Jack Flaherty and his market, because we've seen, Blake Snell goes to the Dodgers, Fried to the Yankees, Burns goes to Arizona. Why do you think that the market is a little softer than what was originally anticipated for Jack Flaherty?
So here are my 2 questions about it. I don't know the answers because you're not in every meeting. You're not in every conversation. Because Jack, a lot of times when free agents are not signed at this point, your first question is, well, they tied to draft pick compensation, right? Nick Pivetta, for example, is in that boat. And you wonder if that's part of the reason why he's having to wait. Jack's not tied to free agent or to a draft pick compensation because he was traded in the middle of last year. So one of my questions would be, what's been the ask from Jack's camp to teams, and maybe there's a big gap between what he's looking for. And we know that the Yankees flunked him on a physical last year. They're not doing that on a whim. And I suspect that teams, and I don't know what I don't have his medical records, but it would be one of the questions that I would ask. I wonder if, how many teams have looked at the medical records. Is that a factor as it was with Jeff Hoffman, who originally worked out a deal with the Atlanta Braves? And when that fell apart, he worked out a deal with the Orioles, and that fell apart because of the physical. So I'd be curious to see what teams are seeing in Jack Flaherty's physical.
It's got to be a factor. I mean, you saw the fastball velocity kind of dip towards the end there. But, I mean, if I'm Jack Flaherty, I'm like, hey, I signed the one-year deal. Hey, put together a really good season. I should have a contract by now. But, you've seen teams kind of go to some of these shorter-term deals for starters. Maybe it's the case for him. I don't think he'll be back as a Dodger, but he's very popular here in Dodgerland. I don't know if you saw him kind of making Manny Machado go back to the dugout and nod those words. I mean, he's kind of got that once a Dodger, always a Dodger feel. But, Buster, last question I have for you is we had talking to Stan Kasten a couple of days ago, and one thing he said was, look, I mean, baseball is not like basketball or football, right? Where you put together the best roster, you have the best player, and there's a good chance you win. Still, right now, the other teams have a 3/4 chance to win the World Series compared to the Dodgers, right? But next season, are you taking the Dodgers to repeat, or are you taking the field? The Dodgers versus the field to win the 2025 World Series?
So if I applied Stan's theory, and Stan's right about this, then you would definitely take the field. Because you still
baseball,
have to
right?
go through a short series. You have to go through a short series, a number of them. And we've seen the Dodgers have the best team in the past and not win the World Series. That's just a fact. The year the Braves won the World Series, they won 88 games. The Phillies made it to the World Series to face the Astros after being, the lowest seed, I think, in the National League, 87 wins or something like that. And there are the good teams. Look, I thought the Profar signing for the Braves was excellent. They're getting Spencer Strider back, Ronald Acuna Jr. The Phillies were the best. We all thought they were the best team for most of last year. You saw it in the power rankings throughout the year, and then they stumbled at the end of the year and then fell apart completely in the postseason. San Diego clearly is not afraid. Those players are not afraid of the Dodgers. But I think right now the Dodgers are overwhelming favorites to win the World Series, and that would definitely be the safe pick.
Hey, we love to hear that. And Buster, we love when you join us here on Dodgers Dugout Live. We cannot thank you enough. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your off season. It's not very much longer. Before we know it, hey, pitchers and catchers are reporting, and we'll be talking all Major League Baseball. But Buster, thank you so much, and you have a great weekend, my man.
You too, Doug. Hang in there.
All right, talk to you soon.